Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 2 XL and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, I personally love the Pixel 2 XLs. I think they were great phones for sure. I think they had a little weird issue when they first came out, but since then, ever since I've been using them, they've been actually really good phones. And honestly, when Google made the Google Pixel 6 Pro back in 2021, I looked at that phone and I looked at it. The first phone that it reminded me of from the Google lineup was the Pixel 2 XL. Like, it was so weird to me how that phone almost gave me the same feeling of when I looked at the Pixel 2 XL back in 2017 when this phone came out, and this phone shocked me. You know, I think I made a funny video at that time saying I hated it or something like that, but truly I really liked this phone. And honestly, it's kind of sad because it's kind of not worth buying anymore, mostly because the newer phones are so much better than this one, and because this phone is unsupported with software, it doesn't really make too much sense to buy this one. But I will leave some phones I would recommend this year linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Pixel 2 XL, on the front we had a 6-inch P OLED display. Now, the funny thing to keep in mind, this was the XL version of this phone. Nowadays, 6 inches is like a small phone nowadays, which is so crazy. Now, on this phone, we did have the top bezel and the bottom bezel. We had like this front-facing speaker, which was a really nice touch. I don't think we've ever seen that back again from Google. I think ever since then, they've had like no front-facing speakers. I think maybe the Pixel 4 maybe had like that front-facing speaker at the top, but like beyond that, it never really came back. But with this phone, we had it, which was actually very cool. Now, the display is still 60 Hz, but it's a 1440p panel. So that was another big thing to keep in mind. And coming from the Pixel XL and between the Pixel 3 XL, this was a really good phone. I really liked the way this phone looked on the front. Now on the bottom, we had a USB Type-C port, which was great. We also had a headphone jack. And with that USB-C port, we had a lot of capability. I think we all know this. And on the back, we basically had a little bit of a difference. We had like a glass back at the top and then an aluminum back on the bottom. So I like this design. I don't really think, even since then, if you think about it, with the Pixel 7 Pros and whatnot, it's still kind of the same. Like, obviously we have camera bumps that kind of stick out, and the top portion is still kind of the same color as the back, but it's a little bit more, it's still kind of the same philosophy. It's like the top bar there's something there, right? There's always something that's going across the top, and it seems like this one still basically had it. We had the camera on the top left corner on the back of this phone, and we had that, fingerprint sensor on the back too, which was honestly very cool. Now, there were some weird things that were missing out on this phone. So for one, we had wired charging, so we didn't have wireless charging on this phone, which I found to be kind of weird. I feel like at that moment too, we probably should have had, some sort of wireless charging on these phones, and we didn't end up getting it, which was kind of weird. And remember, this was 2017. iPhones also, notoriously didn't have wireless charging, but this was the first time that Apple actually brought that feature over, and, in 2017. And this phone actually didn't have that capability, which is kind of sad. But regardless, I still look at this phone and I still think it, still looks very good. I feel like the outside of this phone definitely is held up very, very well. And overall, I would say this is definitely, 2017 was one of the best years of phones. We got this phone, the Galaxy S8, the iPhone 10, the Galaxy Note 8, like so many phones came out that year. Now in the camera department, we do have a single camera setup on the back. We had a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens, and on the front we had an 8 megapixel camera. Now, the funniest thing to keep in mind is that for pretty much every single year, for at least like the first 2 or 3 generations of the Pixels, they completely shifted the landscape of their cameras. Google notoriously, I remember when the Nexus 4 came out, Nexus 5, Nexus 6, Nexus 6P, those cameras notoriously had horrible cameras until I think the Nexus 6P. Then people started changing their sentiment, but the 6P had a huge issue inside of it. I think it was like a display battery issue, something like that. So that phone people kind of forget about. But then with the original Pixel, Google knocked it out of the park. And then with the Pixel 2 XL, people were still very happy with this camera. So I kind of see where some people started getting mad, I think, with the Pixel 3 XL, because that camera really wasn't that great compared to what was in the market. And basically, the way that phone looked didn't really look that good either. So with the Pixel 2 XL, we could do 4K at 30 on the back, we do 1080p at 30 on the front, which is fairly normal back in 2017. Nowadays, we can do 4K at 60 on the front and like 8K on the back. So definitely when compared to phones nowadays, or even when compared to phones back in like 2020, it's really no different. Like, those cameras were really good back then, and they're still very good. With this phone, I would say that this camera is, it was good at that time, but I wouldn't even say it was the best camera of that year, because we have phones like the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 that were substantially better than this phone in my opinion. I think the original Pixel did a great job, but I think shortly after, I think Google kind of got a little bit more lazier in a way, and they started focusing way too much on the software side rather than on the hardware side. So even like the next two phones after this, I mean, they still didn't really bring anything crazy. They finally brought a dual camera setup on the Pixel 4, but even then it seemed kind of late, to be honest. So in terms of the camera setup, that kind of covers it up there. Now in the software and longevity portion, I mean, this was the number one reason why a majority of people bought something like a Google Pixel. They lasted a very long amount of time, and they were supported not only for a long amount of time, but it was stock software. It wasn't like some weird skin version of Android. And I think this was a really cool thing that Google did at the time. But the problem with this phone now is that it's not really supported. There's still a bit of a development community behind it. So if you wanted to like custom ROM this thing and go down that direction, well, you would have the capability, which is nice. But beyond that, like I said, I mean, it still doesn't make any sense to really buy this phone because of that, because there's probably, you can get a phone like the Pixel 6 for like a third of the cost of what it used to get, and that thing is still supported, and the hardware is so much better. So you can custom ROM it to get better software, but you cannot custom ROM it to get a bigger size battery or 120 Hertz or, a faster performing phone by, a long stretch. So kind of big things to keep in mind there. Now on the performance side, we had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chipset inside of it with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now some big things to keep in mind. One, Google has now moved away from their partnership with Qualcomm, and now they are strictly making their own Google Tensor chipsets. So that is a big thing. But two, I mean, 4 gigs of RAM at that time may have been a lot. Nowadays, that is not a lot. All the base model phones, for the most part, come with 8 on the Android side, and those are for like the base models. They can go up to 12 to 16 gigabytes of RAM on some phones. So I will definitely say, from that perspective, this phone actually doesn't feel super slow. Whenever I use it or pick it up, it's still actually quite fascinating because it still doesn't really feel like that slow of a phone. But I will definitely say this is not a phone I'm going to pick up and be the happiest person of using it anymore, because it definitely does feel like a slower phone, especially with the lack of 120 Hertz. Now, I kind of do wish, after using phones like this and looking at the new Tensor chip, I do think Google should probably end up improving their Google Tensor chipsets a little bit more, because when these phones came out back in 2017, these phones were fairly fast, and really any applications and everything that were optimized for the Samsung Galaxies of that year, they were optimized for this phone too, which was very nice because they all share the same chipset. Nowadays there's so many different chipsets and so many different ways to optimize them that it's just kind of giving us a weird experience. I'm still kind of dependent on Snapdragons, to be honest, but I think Tensor will come through at some point. So on the performance standpoint, it's not really that great anymore, but it was back in the day. And to be honest, to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is that I think the Pixel 2 XL brought a lot to the table when it first came out in 2017, but I think it really got overshadowed in 2017 because of phones like the Samsung Galaxy S8 and Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. The iPhone 10 came out that year too, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, and probably a plethora of other phones that also came out that year too. Like, it didn't really make a crazy amount of sense to pick up this phone, also because it came out later that year. But I think this was probably one of the best Google Pixels that Google's ever made. I mean, this was a very good phone. I think build-wise, it was probably top tier. Unfortunately, it's unsupported with soft. We all kind of know this, but I definitely do think when it comes down to it, this was definitely a very interesting phone, and it's still surprising how well it holds up, to be honest. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.